Hi, and welcome back to Mindset Mastery. I'm Corey Hirsch, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about the dangers of people pleasing and the power of being selfish. What if I told you that healthy self-esteem is not the result of generosity, selflessness, or people pleasing, but rather healthy self-esteem comes from being selfish? Many of us are taught from a very young age to put others' needs before our own. That is generous and loving and giving for us to think about others' needs and wants first. We are told that self-esteem is about giving and sacrificing, sometimes even at the expense of our own well-being. But the truth is that healthy self-esteem comes from valuing ourselves first and by being healthy selfish. Healthy selfishness might sound counterintuitive, but hear me out. Healthy selfishness is not about being narcissistic, self-centered, or self-absorbed, but rather, healthy selfishness is about prioritizing your own needs so that you can show up better for others. When you practice healthy selfishness, you're able to live a fulfilling and authentic life. It is a practice of self-respect that lays the foundation for healthy self-esteem. By the end of this video, you will have an understanding of the dangers of people-pleasing and selflessness. When you practice healthy selfishness, you can show up in the world authentically, free of guilt, resentment, or burnout. Let's talk about self-esteem. Self-esteem is about how we value ourselves or our internal sense of worth. It's not just about confidence. It's about knowing deep down inside that you're worthy of love and respect, that your needs are important. It's a deep understanding and belief that you matter. But we've all heard it. Be selfless, be generous, be kind, be a good person. When we people please and constantly put others' needs ahead of our own, we abandon ourselves and we sacrifice our own well-being, health, and happiness. This often leads to burnout, resentment, and a lack of fulfillment. When we people please and act in selfless ways, we often lose sense of who we are and what we want. Our society places a high value on selflessness and glorifies those who put others' needs before their own. We learn from a very young age that it is selfish, self-indulgent, and self-centered to think of ourselves first. The problem is when we define our lives by our selflessness, we end up feeling lost, confused, and angry, and we lose our sense of who we are. As we navigate the complex terrain of self-worth, we must remember that our value is not defined by our ability to please others. It lies in our capacity to be our authentic selves, embracing our strengths and our vulnerabilities. Only then can we cultivate relationships that honor our authentic selves and cultivate true connection. By dismantling the beliefs that lead you to people-pleasing, you can create a new narrative. One that prioritizes authenticity, resilience, and the courage to step into your true self. People-pleasing describes behaviors characterized by selflessness and prioritizing others' needs before your own, often at a significant personal cost. People-pleasing is about seeking validation from others as a way to feel worthy, seen, or loved. People-pleasing is a coping mechanism that is learned from family dynamics, social influences, and cultural narratives. At its core, people-pleasing is about seeking validation and avoiding rejection at all costs. When we people-please, we define our worth based on what we think other people think about us. We abandon ourselves, and we lose sight of our core values, wants, and needs. When we people please, we live our lives for others rather than living our lives for ourselves. When we live our lives trying to fulfill what we think others want from us, we lose sight of who we are and we often act out of congruence with our values. We find ourselves feeling less than because we place a higher importance on what other people think of us than what we think of ourselves. There are many reasons people become people pleasers. People-pleasing is rooted in a desire to build a higher self-esteem, as we believe our people-pleasing tendencies will build up our value to others, while also justifying our worthiness, lovability, and value. Sometimes children learn from a very young age that they must take responsibility for the well-being of other people in their family, because if they don't, there's no one else there who will. Or perhaps a child learns that her value is dependent on her achievement or performance at school. Children learn from a very early age to go to any lengths necessary to get their parents' approval. Others might find that their sense of value and self-worth depends upon fitting in with certain people. They learn to do whatever it takes to fit in, even if that means contorting themselves in wild ways or giving up their values and who they are. While people-pleasing might once have been a coping mechanism that worked well, over time it corrodes relationships and it deteriorates one's sense of self. When you constantly forego your values, ideas, and needs, you lose your sense of self and you end up feeling empty, lonely, and confused. You live your life as though your needs are less important than everyone else, leading you to feel invisible, unworthy, and even unlovable. Here's a quick test to see if you're a people pleaser. 1, do you struggle with setting boundaries or saying no? 2, do you feel like you're not good enough or even unlovable? 3, do you find yourself avoiding conflict at all costs? And 4, are you constantly worried about what others think of you? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you might be a people pleaser. As a recovering people pleaser, I fully understand the pain that comes from being a people pleaser and the freedom that comes from recovery. As a child, my whole identity was tied to people pleasing. I pushed myself to excel academically, often to the point of physical and mental exhaustion, because I was so determined to make my parents proud. High school was a whirlwind of stress as I juggled the need to perform because I was so afraid of letting my parents down. I frequently prioritized others' needs before my own, even when I didn't have the time or the energy to spare. I deferred to friends when making plans because I was so unwilling to appear demanding or selfish. I became a chameleon, contorting myself to fit in and trying to meet others' expectations while feeling increasingly trapped. When I acted without considering my own needs, I felt overwhelmed, resentful, and totally exhausted. My self-worth became so intertwined with others' opinions of me that I was led to wonder, who am I? It's no wonder I spent so many years striving to be selfless and please others. Our culture glorifies selflessness and celebrates those who put others' needs before their own. We often hear stories about those selfless people and the generosity of spirit with which they lived. But at some point, people-pleasing stopped working for me, and I started to reflect on the concept of selflessness and wonder whether it was actually a good thing. I came to a pivotal realization. To be selfless is actually to be less than oneself. In pursuing selflessness, I had abandoned my identity in favor of pleasing others. And it dawned on me, why would I ever want to be less than who I truly am? Although I recognized that selflessness was not the answer, I still felt adrift, struggling to balance caring for others while also taking care of myself. This introspection led me to consider what it means to be selfish. Let's talk about selfishness. Selfishness is frowned upon and vilified to the extent that being called selfish is one of the most biting criticisms one can get. A selfish person is understood as self-centered, narcissistic, self-indulgent, egocentric, and disingenuous. But I'm here to tell you that the choices are not limited to being totally selfless or being completely selfish. When I looked at the word selfish, I encountered 2 definitions. The first describes a person who disregards the needs of others, and the second definition refers to somebody who only thinks of themselves. Delving deeper, I looked at the suffix ish, which means to some extent. I started to wonder whether selfish might mean thinking of yourself to some extent. And I began to think about selfishness as a continuum. Why can't a person be selfish, think about themselves to some extent, while also considering the needs of others? What if we define selfishness to mean a healthy balance? What if there was a healthy selfish? I propose that we think of selfishness not as an all or nothing concept, but as a continuum, a spectrum on which we can lay at different points. On one end of the spectrum, we might have the complete disregard for others. And on the other end of the spectrum, we might have self-neglect. What if the ideal version of selfishness exists somewhere in the middle, where we can care for ourselves without neglecting those around us? As I continue to play with this idea of healthy selfishness, I've come to understand that healthy selfishness involves living authentically and in alignment with our values, while still being considerate of others. Healthy selfishness is about setting boundaries, prioritizing our own needs, and practicing self-compassion. When we practice healthy selfishness, we are also more able to have compassion for others. It's about understanding that self-care is essential for mental and emotional well-being. When you honor your own needs, you tell yourself and the world, I matter and I am worthy of care and attention. And that's how self-esteem grows. The more you prioritize yourself, the more you'll reinforce your sense of worth. You start to believe that you matter. And when you believe you matter, you stop worrying about what other people think of you. You stop settling for less in your relationships, at work, and in every aspect of your life. Healthy selfishness builds self-respect, and that self-respect lays the foundation for healthy self-esteem. So let's talk about 3 simple ways you can start to cultivate healthy selfishness. I encourage you to consider setting boundaries and saying no when you really don't want to do something. If this feels difficult to you, start small and start with low-risk situations. Perhaps you might decline taking an extra meeting or helping your friend move if you're feeling exhausted. Or maybe you say no to a social event that you're not really up for. As you practice, setting healthy boundaries will become easier with time. Practicing self-care is another important aspect of healthy selfishness. It is so important for you to take time for yourself to refuel and recharge. Self-care is not indulgent. It is necessary. Many people think that self-care has to do with pampering yourself or taking a day off. But self-care is really about nurturing and nourishing your mind, your body, and your soul. Things like rest, proper nutrition, exercise, reading a book, getting lost in a story are all forms of self-care that can help reset you so that you can show up as your best self. Without taking the time to take care of ourselves, we are prone to burnout, feeling exhausted, drained, and unappreciated. When you don't practice self-care, you may find yourself feeling unworthy over time because you are not prioritizing your needs. The third way of cultivating healthy selfishness is to choose self-compassion over self-criticism. One of the most powerful forms of healthy selfishness is practicing self-compassion. Healthy selfishness impacts all areas of our lives. People who practice healthy selfishness are less likely to tolerate toxic work environments or underpayment because they understand their value and they know they are worth more. They enjoy healthy self-esteem as they pursue careers that align with their values and goals. They have the confidence to ask for what they're worth. Healthy selfishness also contributes to genuine connection and more authentic relationships. When you understand and respect your own needs, you're better equipped to form genuine, balanced relationships with others. When you show up in an authentic way, people come to know you for who you are, not who you think they want you to be. Your mental health will improve when you start to practice healthy selfishness. Because when you act in congruence with your authentic self, you prevent stress, burnout, resentment, and guilt. You also nurture a healthy self-esteem. Embracing healthy selfishness can liberate you from the burdens of people-pleasing and selfless behaviors, leading you to live a much more authentic and fulfilling life. This journey encompasses recovery, self-compassion, compassion for others, and personal responsibility. Remember, lasting self-esteem comes from valuing yourself, setting boundaries, making time for self-care, and practicing self-compassion. It's important that you remember that healthy selfishness is not about being self-centered in a negative way. It's about making sure that your needs are met so that you can show up as your best self for others. For those of you who identify as people pleasers, I encourage you to reflect on your values and cultivate a self-concept rooted in your unique identity. Honor yourself, embrace your authenticity, and liberate yourself from the constraints of people-pleasing and selflessness. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit from this message. I want you to remember it's time to be selfish in the healthiest sense of the word.